Hi everybody, and welcome to the Module 6 Fireside Chat. Again, I do not have this set up, so the fireplace isn't back of me. To do that takes a little bit more editing with my camcorder, and my current software just isn't the best. I'm going to do an upgrade, but for now, you can imagine that in back of me is on fire. But please probably don't imagine that because that'd be pretty freaky. But no, it is getting close to Halloween, my favorite holiday of the year. And I am prepared to be a firefighter once again, partly because I can rely on my old firefighter gear, which is now becoming fairly ancient. I do have a helmet in back of me, right back there. So yes. And I do have a birthday coming up here on November 7th, so that will be before our next chat. So yeah, I can start to tell people, I remember when. So yes. A couple things. First of all, on the interstate, one of the things I get to see a lot, custom license plates. And they drive me crazy because I just don't have the patience to try to figure these things out. So today, someone passed me in an SUV, and SMR girl, like summer girl, got it. Okay, I can work with that. But otherwise, well, what does this mean, So, I don't know. I've never had a custom plate, but so I tomorrow am playing on the staff team for a goal ball competition where it's staff versus our varsity team at Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. You can you can YouTube goal ball, GOAL ball, plus maybe blind or something like that. But it's an interesting sport. Basically 3 people on one side of a gym, 3 on another, raised lines, and you have a ball which is kind of like a heavier rubber ball about the size of a bowling ball, has a bell inside, and you have to roll it, but it's not just like casually rolling, like really get this thing going. Like people wear padding and stuff like that to get bruised, and then you have to hear where this and try to locate yourself so you can position so it doesn't get by you, because if it gets out the back, then you give up a point. And it's timed, I think it's like 6 or 8 minute quarters, but I've never played it before. I was asked by our staff team to participate. So we'll see how it goes tomorrow. I'm glad to do it. So my goal is not to embarrass myself or to embarrass the staff to any high degree, because we do have a pretty outstanding varsity team. So on Saturday, I'm having 2 full cords of firewood delivered, so 6 face cords. And I have on the other side of this wall, which I'm looking at, is my furnace room, and I stack all of the wood down there, plus I already have some wood in there, but I have to take it from outside where it will get dropped off and then take it in a sack downstairs and to put it in and stack. It takes me about 10 hours every time I have wood delivered. So am I looking forward to it? No, not at all. Not at all. Especially getting older, not as fun as it was. A little bit, you get done when I was younger, it'd be like, yay, take a picture of it. Not so much anymore, but we do have a nice wood-burning insert that's very efficient, heats the house. So yes, I don't know if any of you remember the movie Burbs, but with Tom Hanks, a quote, home furnace, is that supposed to go to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit? Okay. But yeah, this thing is like super efficient. I can burn like all of this wood and probably empty the ash like twice during the year. I mean, it's that efficient. So I want to kind of my note sheet here, notes for today's Fireside chat. I have this cough, which I believe is still allergies. I'm not getting over it, but I opened up the final modules, 5, 6, 7. They're all open, and I did that so you can go in and kind of pace your work between now and the end of class. So basically, 2 months to go. Your biggest assignment is the capstone assignment due at the end of class, the Bill Porter plan. So take a look at what you're required to do for that. And yeah, everything's open right now. So I have shout outs for everybody. Everybody gets a shout out again. So, all right, good stuff. And first of all, hey, a few things. One is on YouTube, I have 14 followers of these fireside chats and some other things I do. If you want to be a follower, then please just go in and hit subscribe if you want to. I also am on Twitter and post, a lot of stuff. And I have a blog too that you can find if you hunt through Twitter. But most of that's kind of safety theme. But if you have an interest in it, I kind of talk about not just school safety, but some pretty interesting historical safety things. And what else? No one commented last time on the Fireside chat. So, I don't know. But, you can comment on the Fireside chat also. But here we go. Let's talk about Mark. Mark, you had a statement of, you talked about presumed competence. I like that. I like that a lot. And it was the context of Roe Vargo. How many of us, and I wrote, how many of us instantly recalibrate our expectations for someone, a student or an adult, once we learn that person has a disability? So sometimes it's overt. I mean, if a person's in a wheelchair, that's one thing. If a person has a learning disability, you might not, that's not probably going to be evident unless they reference it. But, there's this tendency, I believe, to recalibrate our rigor and our expectations and ratchet those down, when that's not what we should do. It seems instinctual. Like once that label goes on, the label's there to kind of say, change your set of expectations, bring in accommodations and supports. And it's kind of just become that way with I think a lot of IEPs, almost most of the IEPs I've attended and part of over the years, they come from a deficit perspective. They're being rewritten. IEPs are somewhat different now than they were years ago, but still at an IEP meeting tonight, it still comes from that mode. Let's talk about everything that's wrong except a little section in the present level where we talk about strengths of the student, whatever. But, I really think, especially IEP meetings and what's shared, I just really work hard to bring out the competencies of the student and where we're going to go, as far as growth from baseline and things like that, versus saying statements like the student can't do this or the student can't do this. Here's an example of something. So a student I work with, a high school student, applied for a job at a music company in Janesville. And she's extremely musically talented, can play many instruments, and would be great for the position. And one of the things that she talks about, we practiced the interview, and I pretended I was interviewing her for this position, and I said, tell me more about yourself and whatever. And she started to say, well, I struggle with orientation. It takes me a long time to get to know where things are at and all of this, and kind of was going down that path. And I stopped her and said, okay, you can accomplish conveying the same message by saying that once somebody shows you where things are, you'll practice a lot to get to know secondhand, just get to know where they are, but like the back of your hand. So you'll practice a lot to do that. So that's a different message, because here you're kind of just telling me what you can't do. You're capable of so much. So like, just frame it of really, the reality is you can do this. It's just, it's going to take you more practice, which you'll put in. You're very hardworking. So, but again, I like that presumed competence. You did a nice job with that, Mark. Thank you. Brenda, keepers of the dream. I appreciate it. Mentioning someone or a group of people to rally around a child. You talked about your own experiences and your own specialized training as a child advocate, which I thought added a really rich context to your response. You're right on, and I think the Rita Pierson video, which a number of you had seen Rita Pierson before, if not that video, other videos, but Rita Pierson is definitely a keeper of the dream. But let me just kids rise to the expectations. I mean, Rita Pierson knows it. I mean, where she was telling the kids, hey, you're all selected because you're going to be the role models for the rest of the kids, and because you are the best of the best. And by telling them that, they rise to that challenge. They rise and become that persona. I had a friend who currently is a school psychologist, or I have a friend, and she, her family had moved around a lot when she was a kid, and it was a military family, and just a really hard situation, because literally would move 2-3 times maybe in a year, and it really impacted her schooling. And she told me when she was in high school, she was really reserved, and I mean, she's very intelligent, but the family dynamics too, there wasn't really any money, large family, and she wasn't really even thinking about college. And it was a counselor that sat down, one of the school counselors, and talked and said, you really need to give yourself this opportunity. And the counselor paid for her application to college, which back then was like $20-$25. And she was accepted, and then got student loans and got in, and is to this day an outstanding school psychologist, outstanding. And but that person was her champion, and she'll go back and say, it was that one person, and if they wouldn't have said that and kind of brought me out of my shell and just encouraged me and been there. And of course, not that we're all going to pay for applications things, but that one person, think of that vector, coming into life and then putting off in a different direction. It's just amazing. I think about these shows where they talk about meteors coming in toward the Earth, and if you could intercept one a couple of years in advance, and move it just a fraction of a few inches, that over the time, by the time it got to Earth, it would pass by thousands of miles. So it's a thing of just that little vector push that we don't realize what an impact that can have. Anthony, you wrote, I need a clear vision of what I want an inclusive classroom to be. And you're right. Unless you really know what you expect from an inclusive classroom, I mean, how do you get there? You got to have your end in mind thinking. And I think Stephen Covey says stuff like that. But what does it really mean to be inclusive? How are you going to define that? And it really, is it just having students in your classroom? Because that's kind of mainstreaming. Is it having them participate? Then we get more into inclusion. Is it having them where they are able then to step into roles and teach other students, in small groups? And okay, now we're getting more into inclusion. And are we learning about, students personally and cultural I mean, all of these things. So yeah, defining out what you want. Thanks for saying that, because otherwise, It's like, saying, I'm going to, build a house. Okay, well, what do you want it to be? Like how many rooms and what do you want it to look like? And, okay, yeah, I guess you got to think of these things. So it's a lot like that, putting that blueprint out there. So um, thanks for noting that. Another thing is, Anthony, to do that, observe others. How many times does a teacher actually go and observe another teacher in the same building? It doesn't happen a lot. It doesn't happen enough, first of all, but it barely happens. Observe somebody else and, kind of look at it from a lens of inclusion and maybe here's what you'll take away from it and maybe here's something, you're not going to do. Doesn't mean they're doing something wrong, just means that, yeah, that's not really your style. But the other part is you can pilot things, and I think that's a great way, just to say, we're going to pilot this where we take one, every week we're going to read about one country or something, like that. Or I'm going to start including some disability awareness books like My Friend Will by Tara Tuchel into our language arts section. Whatever it is, but, just pilot a few things, try. We get so beat down on trying to try things. People aren't people are willing to try. They want to try, but then there's usually, if it's not successful, it's perceived as failure, and it's really not failure. It's just like, yeah, I tried it. I'm glad I tried it, but it didn't really have what I thought it was going to generate, so I'm going to try something else. But we tend to stigmatize, if we go outside of the boundaries in curriculum or whatever. So, yeah, hey, be Rita Pearson. Give it a try. Joseph, you had a question about movements toward inclusion in the context of what you perceive as a school shooting epidemic going on right now. And that's a fascinating question, especially because I did my dissertation on high stakes decision making in safety situations and, presented on TV about school safety and active shooters. Here's what I came up with. One is we talk about movements toward inclusion. I think, first of all, we're looking at a one-size-fits-all drill for all students when it comes to like an active shooter. And so when I say inclusion, I'm kind of saying there's a philosophy, like everyone's going to get the same experience, this drill. We want people to know this. And what happens a lot of times now is these drills are way over the top. Kids are, spattered with fake blood and lying on the floor, and adults like they've been shot. And I'm like, God, it's horrible. Don't do that. Like, there are lawsuits. I have a book solely, it's called Many of the Immortals. It'll be published by Roman and Littlefield. And it just talks about the multitude of lawsuits that come out from staff and students who have post-traumatic stress disorder, cumulative stress disorder, physical injuries, and so on, from being subjected to these high stress kind of ambush type drills. There's no need to do that. We don't do that stuff with fire. We don't pump smoke into the hallways and have kids run around. But we talk about the school shooting epidemic, and this is a hard question for me. I struggle with this one because, I see that, but we talk about inclusion, and I think to preserve inclusion in a time when we're probably very hypersensitive to trying to profile students, whether we say we're doing it or not, I think to some extent it happens. I'm not saying profiling, based on race or anything, but profiling, for example, people have told me when I consult with places, we think the goth kids are more likely to, cause violence. Well, okay, that's not statistically, empirically accurate, but so it's a situation where I think we don't put enough into early detection of students who are struggling to feel included, to have school connectedness, and then working to restore that bond with them. And sometimes restorative practices can really do a lot with that. Because once students don't feel connected to school or connected to each other, then we know statistically, and you can look up the 2009 CDC report on school connectedness, students are more prone to violence, and violence against others, violence in their school. So I think the answer I have to that is, we're putting a lot of time and money into these sensationalized drills, these interagency drills, which I think are ridiculous. And, we're not putting nearly enough time into detecting when we have something that seems out of the ordinary, when a student might be making some posts which are indicating unhappiness or intent, harm to self or others, or disconnect from school or things like that, disconnect from family, whatever, and ways to identify and report that. So I don't know if that answered the question. I'll keep thinking about it. But one of the things is we don't have, unless you have a really robust restorative practices program in your school, there isn't a good way to reunite like a long-term suspension, abeyance agreement, a kid who's been out, 3 months, or a kid that's been out, expelled for a year or something like that. There's not a good way to reunite those students into the school. And to do that, if you have a restorative meeting where the student is there and some of the staff, maybe some other students, and you balance it out, and there's ways to facilitate these where it becomes a healing process, and then the student is reunited with the school versus, okay, we're going to have the student just start back on this day. Well, yeah, that doesn't do much for inclusion. That student still feels like an outsider every time that they walk into that building, and they feel like all eyes are on them of what one move and you're out of here. So Brent, your classroom mission statement included, "We will obey every guideline." So a few things. One is, if you're having your students contribute to the development of your classroom goals or your classroom rules, I think that can be very powerful. And when we talk about students obeying every guideline, what if it's a bad guideline? What if it just really maybe doesn't make sense, or when you made it, maybe there was a logic behind it, but student says, why do we have to do this? I think you need a way to have students propose a counter argument in a respectful, tactful way. And that's one of the things in my research when I was at UW. I did an independent study on the Youth Code of Silence. And one of the things was, youth just feeling marginalized. And it was several annotated bibliography articles I went through in studies. But where students would say, we can't vote, we're basically told what to do. And if the rules aren't just, we don't have a way to complain that, anyone will actually sit down and kind of, listen to us. So I think you can really make an inroad if you take that a step further and say, so many kind of hiccups, we will obey every guideline, and if we feel there's a reason to not obey that guideline, that we can, articulate that or convey that in a productive manner, and I know, excuse me, some classes, high school classes in big districts that, even teach like peaceful protest. If, students, if they would, all get up and walk out of the building or something, not that that's what you want, but versus, vandalism or something else. But hopefully teaching diplomacy and how to bring about, and one of the things too is it's a real opportunity to teach students, okay, if you don't agree with this, then what would be better? Maybe work as a group, like what would be better than this? So come up with a solution, because anyone can complain. But if you come to me and say, here's an idea that we have, wow, that's pretty powerful. So, Danielle, our class, we will show respect for ourselves. You had stated that. And that is, I'm in the middle of it right now. We're working through a self-concept school-wide kind of unit right now. And what is happening is it's a real struggle for students to do that. When you talk about respect, they can fairly rapidly identify what respect means if they are giving respect to somebody else. I'm listening to them. I am letting them convey their point of view. I'm helping them out if they need help, if they drop something in the hallway or whatever. Complimenting, things like that. But when it comes to self-respect, that's a very hard concept for a lot of students. And I've seen it this week. One of the reasons I believe that happens is tacit knowledge, or, tacit knowledge is that really that gut feeling when you just kind of know something. And I think self-respect is something a lot of kids kind of, they know if they feel good about their image, or if they don't. But not all students can articulate that and put that into words. So that is something definitely that can be worked on, is giving the words of, okay, let's, again, you could do that in a restorative circle type setting of, let's come up with words of what it means for self-respect. Self-respect, means that I'm not going to, load up my body on a whole bunch of junk food because I know it's not, good for me, and that I'm not going to feel well, later. Self-respect is that I'm going to be, telling the truth and keeping my word, because that's important, and that's how, I want people to feel that they can trust me, and that I can be a good friend. And I know if I'm not keeping my word, I'm not respecting that friendship and the trust that other people have put it, things like that. So I think that's excellent what you wrote, and work through that tacit knowledge barrier to start putting some words and examples to that when you are with your class. Caitlin, your classroom goal is learn from each other. You didn't mention that. And I remember one of my teachers in middle school talked about, okay, if he lectured to us during a class, then we would retain this much information. And if we were actually then teaching that information to someone else, then we retained a much higher level. And yeah, put kids into that role of demonstrating and, what they've done, how they came to their findings, either individually or as a group. but even working as in teams, in learning from each other and bringing their own experiences and own angles into more open-ended, problems of inquiry. But yeah, I think learning from each other, there's still a tendency to have everyone do everything the same way. And, everybody has to hand in this paper. And like in here, I've said, if you want to do a video response and post that link into your, discussion thread where you're doing something like this, go for it. But, people are going to learn if something then that you're talking about that you're sharing with others, they're going to learn from you. You're stepping into that role of educators. So I think it's very empowering from students, and again, learning from each other. I like that a lot. Another thing is I think it teaches students how to give and receive feedback, because let's face it, typically receiving feedback, puts one on the defensive. When I started out as a therapist in the hospital setting over 20 years ago, I remember we had chart audits. And so we would get around, once every 2 weeks for a couple hours. The rehab director would pull out the charts, and so if I had therapy notes that I was writing for a patient, and then the physical therapist, an occupational, respiratory, whatever, we would take the charts and we would switch them around. So I would be reading somebody else's note, and then I had kind of a rubric that was provided, and I would be critiquing, giving some feedback on this note. Did it contain what it needed to contain? Was it clear? And the other things. And we were all trained on this rubric and this style by our rehab director. But then someone was doing that with some of my notes too. And, so we'd have about an hour to do that. Then we'd have an hour to report out to each other. And at first, the first few times I was kind of defensive. I'm like, that's a good note that I wrote. And I can't believe, you said that or you pointed that out. But really, it was accurate. I just wasn't taking the feedback well. And then after a few times, I welcomed the feedback. And my notes really improved once I stopped being kind of closed-minded to it and took the feedback. And I think it's important because we will always have new information that will come into our lives that will alter our positions if we're mature enough to allow that to happen. It's like, when you think, first of all, that, the world is flat, and then, eventually you have evidence learning. It's not flat, it's circular. So, now you have new information that comes into play that wasn't available before, and it changes your position. So I think that's really important that you do that. Seaver, you discussed building consensus, giving people an opportunity to express their thoughts and ask questions. So I'm going to take that a step further. So you're talking about building consensus, and the components to do that. One is let people talk. Now it needs to be productive, because if people just complain, that gets into a discussion I just had a little bit ago where if you have something that you're going to complain about, then have a solution that you present subsequent to that. Otherwise, don't bring it up. And people, giving people an opportunity to ask questions, even like, why do we do it this way? And it's legit, because you could say we do it this way because here. Or maybe it's, maybe why do we do it this way? So I think to challenge that dogma sometimes is good. The other part, though, is, sometimes people, initiatives in schools tend to, all of a sudden, here's a new initiative, came down from the state, and we're going to, needs to be implemented, and then there's a turnover in the Secretary of Education, whatever, and 2 years later the initiative fades, it's gone. And then if you're in education long enough, you see these things happen. So some people are, the more they're in education, the less they're going to vest into an initiative until they really know that it has the roots and the staying power before they're going to put their time and energy, divert it from something else into that. And sometimes, the saying, to get where you're going, you're going to have to join in the parade. And some people, you might not have consensus on something, but it's a decision, that needs to be made, and this is the way we're going. Like, we're going to block schedule because it's going to allow more common planning time, and a few people are against the block schedule because, whatever reasons. Well, sorry, but, this is what we're doing, and you need to have your mindset that that's what you're going to be doing, is a block schedule, and commit to it. So again, sometimes you got to join a parade to get where you're going. And so let's look ahead to Module 5. Module 5 is one of my favorites. There's an emphasis on co-teaching, or some people kind of say team teaching, but I get co-teaching. So co-teaching is, in my perspective, a very, very powerful component of inclusion. Special education teacher, regular education teacher working together, common planning time, developing lessons, expectations, going to similar training, similar professional development, going to those together, and then when the class is being taught, both are viewed as teachers, both are delivering instruction. What happens a lot? Regular education teacher develops a lesson, delivers the instruction. Special education teacher is present, serves as a helper to students with disabilities, or sometimes other students who are struggling with some of the content mastery. That is really a teach and assist model. That's not co-teach. So to really get a genuine co-teach model, which this module talks about a lot, you need to have common planning time. You need to have both teachers delivering instruction and being viewed as teachers, versus a teacher and a helper. I also like that we talk about station teaching in this chapter, and I saw amazing station teaching years ago when I was in the classroom. There was a teacher that her entire room was just exemplars of different assignments. So let's say the assignment was, learning about the pilgrims, for example. A rubric there might be, okay, you're going to write a letter back home as if you were on the Santa Maria or whatever. So she would have her rubric and go over it with the students of, here's what I'm expecting your letter to have. And here's what some letters look like that achieve all of the things I want you to do. And here's some that are not complete, and here's some that really are incomplete. So look at your work and compare it to these so you get an idea. And so the whole room had rubrics and it had exemplars up. And not only like, here's like what I want, but here's what doesn't cut it. This isn't going to work. And then having students take their own work and put it against that to calibrate it, and also work with peers and other groups, other kids. And that's where you learn from other students and say, okay, my paper, where do you think it falls? Well, I think it kind of, let me do the rubric thing. You're close, but you don't really cover like this area. Powerful, powerful, powerful. And then universal design for learning. So, you can demonstrate learning. You can do a diorama. You could do a skit. You could do a paper. You could do this letter back home. You could draw a map and talk about it and whatever. So so many things, but they would have to meet the components of this rubric or these rubrics. Just awesome, just awesome. So I would encourage you to really consider that, that heavy use of exemplars. This is something that just drove me crazy with the DPI. When I was a special ed director, there were numerous times when there would be forms, and the DPI does have some sample forms, but not a lot. And I would say, can you just provide like more samples? So like we can really get an idea of different ways to write IEPs and write goals, which meet the requirements of what you're looking for. And, a lot of that stuff just never was delivered. And, one time someone told me from the department, well, if we show like this set way to do it, then everyone's going to do it this way. I'm thinking, but if it's the right way, then who cares? I mean, if it's the right way, then if this works for you, why wouldn't you want to show that? Well, the real reason is if you're wrong and then you show everybody how to do it and they do it the wrong way, then you risk looking bad. So it's just, I never like when people say, I'm not going to give an example because then everyone's going to do it this way. So I think that's a really poor answer to give. So again, I think giving different exemplars can be very powerful. We have a scavenger hunt assignment due in Module 5. So if you are currently not teaching, make contact with somebody that's a teacher, or make contact with somebody in class here that's a teacher right now. But you might have to be creative on that. If you're teaching in a private school, again, you might have to get creative, or imagine, if some of these things were present, or what it would take to put these things in place, like co-teaching, station teaching, things like that, teach and assist. So again, that might take a little bit more exploration. Now, the good thing is this class is taught during the school year. When I teach this in summer, it can really present an additional challenge for people because school's not in session. They have a harder time accessing teachers. But right now, it should be no problem for you, even if you're not teaching. You have a number of peers in this class who are teachers. I'm sure that you probably know teachers, somebody that you could contact. And this might require you to make a visit to a school, sit in and observe, for an hour or, a couple hours. But whatever you want to do with that, if there's something really unique or something that's presenting some challenge to you, email me about it and we'll work through it. So, all right. We are through everything that's on that sheet. I want to thank you for participating. I will update the grade book, not exactly sure when, but don't worry if some things are not showing up as having a grade entered. When I do update grades, I will always make a post saying grades have been updated. So right now, I don't have concerns about anybody in the class. If I did, I would have contacted you. So I do always check participants, making sure, that you're accessing the class at least every couple days. Please continue to be active posters. I know this gets to be a busier time of year with testing and things like that going on in schools. And yeah, but nice job, everybody. Glad to do a shout out for everyone. And before you think of those customized license plates, think of people like me, the old timers on the road, thinking, what's going on? And hey, let's close with this. All these commercials now, these cars that have these detection systems, front end detection collision system, and they'll show someone and they're like, listening to a song, then they kind of envision they're on stage, or they start reading a book or something. Like, pay attention, you're driving. Like, come on. These scenarios are just so out there, that they give. I'm like, please, you know, if this is just going to make people not pay attention more, then is it really, you know, a good thing? I don't know. But wow. I have a backup alarm on my car radar, and I still ran over my garbage can. So, but it's dark, and then I put reflectors on. It's hard to see. But all right, have a great Halloween, and continue to be active posters, and take care. So, thank you.